Welcome everyone to the day the federal data went dark, a year of monitoring and action. I'm going to be honest, I drafted opening remarks for this event weeks ago. Those remarks were intended to reflect a year of increasing pressure to erase, rewrite, and ignore data, unless, of course, the data could be weaponized. 1 year ago, on Friday, January 31st, 2025, thousands of federal websites and data systems went dark. And as many of those sites came back online, they came back with missing pieces, warning banners, or plans for future revisions. To put it bluntly, it's been a very difficult year for data. But that was weeks ago. Today, as we're all reeling from headline after graphic headline and the number of casualties is rising, I feel like those earlier remarks were insufficient. So first, I want to acknowledge that this is a difficult time. It's difficult enough that talking about data almost seems frivolous. Almost. But this work is not frivolous. I would argue that data is not frivolous. If it were, people wouldn't be trying to erase it. At its best, data can be used to ensure that we all have clean air and safe drinking water. Data can help ensure that preschool programs are available to the kids who need them and that the curriculum is high quality. Data can help us figure out who's having trouble affording groceries and whether or not a change in policy leaves more or less people food insecure. Our first speaker has an inventory of nearly 100 examples like this. Over the next hour, you'll hear from more than a dozen organizations highlighting their work to ensure that critical data systems continue. We're recording today's session and will send a post-event email with links, resources, and details on each of the efforts presented here today. Some will talk about work monitoring the federal ecosystem broadly. Others will talk about specific topics like health, gender, and the environment. Some will talk about how they're organizing trainings and workshops that are reaching people who never before cared about data. And others will talk about legal and legislative actions. There are many players working to defend public data on every front you can think of. What you might not know is that although this panel seems incredibly crowded, with a whopping 13 panelists, we had dozens more that we could have included. As an organizer, it was difficult to figure out how to make this event even somewhat manageable, and in about 57 minutes, we'll figure out whether or not we succeeded. And that's an absolutely beautiful problem to have right now. Across all 13 presenters, the common theme is that these are new efforts that have sprung up over the past year in response to threats to data. This groundswell of support and the level of collaboration and partnership regularly bowls me over. So in this time of great unrest and uncertainty, I'm leaning into that old adage that we should look for the helpers. 13 of them are here today to tell you how they're helping. And Melanie, with that, I would love for you to kick us off.
Thanks, Beth, and hi, everyone. I'm Melanie Klein. I'm a data scientist and contributor to essentialdata.us. This project was launched in 2025 by Denise Ross, who was the former U.S. Chief Data Scientist and now Senior Advisor at the Federation of American Scientists. And the purpose of Essential Data is to communicate the value of federal data sets in American lives and livelihoods. Last January, when many federal data sets temporarily disappeared and went down, it was really a wake-up call that we can't be taking federal data for granted. And a key way that we can make sure that data keeps flowing is to tell real-world stories about why it's essential. To do that, we've been crafting single-sentence use cases to show how federal data sets are improving people's lives. So far, we've developed a collection of nearly 100 use cases, spanning data from more than 20 agencies and covering a wide variety of data types, ranging from statistical to administrative to geospatial to evaluation data and more. You see, the public may have an awareness of jobs data and weather data, but the federal data ecosystem is really so much larger than what we typically think of and is made up of hundreds of thousands of data sets. The reality is that federal data touches us in every corner of our lives, often in ways we don't even notice. So while it's often invisible, it's still critical infrastructure that we depend on. So in our collection of use cases, here are some examples of data sets that we highlight. First, an online marketplace uses data from the Consumer Product Safety Commission Recall API to notify past buyers when a product is being recalled for safety reasons. Second, companies like Zillow will use the Department of Education civil rights data collection to help home buyers determine which schools have the best disability resources. And third, BATS, believe it or not, help our economy by providing billions of dollars in free pest control for farmers. So, the North American Bat Monitoring Database is critical for knowing where the bats are so we can best protect them when building new infrastructure. Now that you've heard some of these use cases, you may have noticed two things that make them unique. First, each one focuses on a specific data set. When it comes to protecting federal data, it's often a ground game, data set by data set, so it's really important to be explicit about the name of the data set and why it's critical. Second, these use cases go beyond just the work of the data user and researcher. They center the beneficiary, whether it's an individual, a family, a company, a business, or others whose lives are positively impacted because of the dataset. So, as part of our work with writing these use cases, we've also been running social media campaigns to highlight them. So, as you can see here, we've had campaigns that span topics like education, suicide prevention, and consumer safety. And a lot of times, these campaigns are paired with workshops alongside partner organizations. So, for example, we worked with the National Neighborhood Indicators Partnership to talk about how federal data helps American neighborhoods. And we also worked with the Disability Health Equity Research Network to come up with a campaign for National Disability Employment Awareness Month. Ultimately, this work is about more than just having a use case to share, but it's also really a social process that helps us reframe our thinking about how we talk about data and making sure that we're centering the beneficiary and those who benefit from it. So ultimately, our hope is that for anyone here who's a data user, we encourage you to make that shift of thinking of yourself as both a data user and a data advocate and help us tell the story of federal data sets. So if you have a federal data set, I encourage you to head to our website and submit a use case. And now I'll pass it off to Steve Pearson at the American Statistical Association.
Thank you, Melanie, and thanks to our organizers and to you all for attending. I'm Steve Pearson of the American Statistical Association. We are the professional association of statisticians and data scientists. We've got folks in industry, academia, and government. And because statistics is a science of learning from data, our folks are in many different disciplines and fields and settings. And so let's go to the next slide, please, Melanie. For today's focus, I'm gonna really zero in on ASA's work in the federal data ecosystem, where our focus is to ensure that federal statistical agencies have the resources they need to do their job effectively and efficiently. And we employ a number of different tactics and activities to do that, from research and from research and reports to meetings on the Hill, media outreach, and several others. So in addition to the continued advocacy, our three main projects in 2025 and this year are these. Assess and monitor the health of the federal statistical agencies. And by health, here we mean to what extent are the agencies able to basically fulfill the Evidence Act and the demands of the data users to produce relevant, timely, credible, accurate, and objective data. Second project is on modernizing the federal statistical agencies. So this is being led by former BLS commissioners Erica Grosjean and Bill Beach, as well as by former chief statistician Nancy Potok. And what they are undertaking is what can be done to improve the overall efficiency in any number of ways, organizational, technological, legal, to improve the overall efficiency to provide, those relevant timely products and to meet the needs of data users and the data users. Our third project is on reimagining the National Center for Education Statistics. So we all know that a little less than a year ago, NCS was decimated. But we also know, or hopefully you know, that NCS was the agency I'd say most hindered by bureaucracy, red tape, and duplicative processes. So our goal, our hope here is, can we address those and get those removed so when then NCS is back up and running efficiently, those can be addressed, but they can also really fulfill, this vision for a 21st century statistical agency. Melanie, if you go to the next slide, please. I'm going to focus in on that first project, monitoring, assessing the health. We call it our FedStat Health Project. We are starting our fourth year. And we'd really like your input on what that should look like. Those images are the three reports we have produced to date. So in July of 2024, our inaugural report, The nation's data at risk, that says it all, but there's a lot to dig into there. So please go have a look. We also produced a report this summer called Crossroads, and that is that speaks for itself. And then we produced our second annual update in December. So this year we're continuing our monitoring. We've got a project where we want you, the data users, to help us tell us about any products in terms of granularity, timeliness, frequency. And then thanks to Zach Seeskin on our team, we are continuing, and he's at Nordic, we're continuing to monitor public trust and confidence in federal statistics. That's the URL, and I am turning this over to Abby.
Thanks so much, Steve. This is Abby Tai. I am from the National Public Health Coalition, and we run the CDC Data Project. NPHC and the CDC Data Project are made up of current and former public health folks, both from CDC and state and health departments. And we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So our project was established due to a huge lack of information, particularly about CDC staffing cuts and proposed budget cuts from the president's 2026 budget. So what started as a report has turned into this really comprehensive dashboard that was launched in June of 2025. And it's made up of a lot of things. It's made up of public data. It's made up of crowdsourcing data for the RIFs at the agency. And it's really kind of broken out at this point into 3 dashboards. So we have the budget dashboard that digs into the proposed cuts that we've seen. And then we have the RIF dashboard, which shows staffing cuts and which centers have been impacted. And then we have a grants dashboard that shows proposed cuts to grants. It's organized so that you can look at how states might be impacted, how disease areas might be impacted. And it's meant to be used by anybody who's trying to better understand what cuts at CDC might look like for their communities or their constituents. You can go ahead to the next slide, Melanie. So our primary objective is to take this data and really use it in like actionable ways. So we have a website. We've had over 30,000 unique website viewers, but we use a lot of this data to inform our social media strategy and our social media posts, along with how we communicate with Congress and how we communicate with traditional media. So we've been able to use a lot of this data to support and get headlines out there, noting that 80% of CDC funding goes to states and localities, and that these cuts are direct cuts to those communities and those states. We've been able to provide really vital information about what's happening within CDC related to the staffing cuts. In a time period where there really is no transparency. And in fact, I think through our crowdsourcing numbers, we have a better understanding of who all has been cut at CDC than HHS itself does. And so we've been able to do that through a network of thousands of people at the agency. And then, we've worked really closely with Congress members to provide information about their states in particular. And through that, we've been able to have Hill Days where we educate Congress people about what cuts mean for their, people that they serve. We've helped them be able to prepare for committee hearings, and been able to kind of show the process of what's happened at CDC, which you can see on the far right. We have a chaos timeline that shows the change. And we're hoping to expand this as we move into the new year and highlight other agencies. But yeah, it's a work in progress and something we're always adding to and changing. And I will hand it over to Paul at Friends of BLS.
Thanks so much, Abby. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Schroeder, and I am one of the co-chairs for the Friends of BLS. Next slide. We're a group that started back in 2014, and we were created to support the BLS mission and the staff and ensure there was a champion pushing for funding levels for BLS on the Hill. There are actually two other co-chairs, both of them former BLS commissioners, Erica Groshin, who served under Obama, and Bill Beach, who served under Trump 1.0. Not to be too obvious, but Erica and Bill are really the stars here. I'm just more of a backup singer. And we are supported by a very active and engaged steering committee composed of folks, many of which you will recognize and some of which are on this panel. Needless to say, the past year has been a tough one for BLS, and the Friends have been very active, probably more active this year than in the past few years combined. Next slide, please. So here's a timeline of events since January 20th. The first big hit was a discontinuation of restricted data access in June. This included all data sets that were restricted access from BLS except for the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth. In August, we saw the big news hit, and the BLS commissioner, Erica McIntyre, was removed following a less than stellar jobs report by the Trump administration. Just an hour after Trump announced the firing, Erica Groshin reached out to the steering committee, and we were all on a Zoom call drafting a statement, which was released a couple of hours later. And this event really triggered a groundswell of support for the Friends of BLS and for BLS itself. Our group grew more than 3 times shortly thereafter the firing of the commissioner. A couple of weeks after that, a controversial nomination of A.J. Anthony was put forward by the administration. You'll remember this is one of the nominations that he was actually photographed at the Capitol during January 6th. In September, we saw the 2024 consumer expenditure data release postponed. And according to folks who have been around for a while, this has never occurred before. And this delay was likely related to a depletion in resources at BLS, which has lost about 25% of its staff due to various early separation programs that have occurred throughout the year. And later on that month, the White House eventually withdrew Anthony's nomination, which was welcome news, and we're still waiting for the nomination of the next commissioner. Just before New Year's, we had something come up with a controversy over the November CPI estimates. This was due to a typo in how BLS estimated OER, or owner's equivalent rent. This was a mistake that was actually corrected in an errata published by BLS. And typically, this is not the sort of thing that makes the news, but due to the increased scrutiny of BLS by both the administration, the media, and the public, the Friends thought it was important to put out a statement on this, so we did so. And I just want to close by saying that a number of commentators have asked if we can still trust the data coming out of BLS. Our answer is yes, we can. It is very hard to cook books when the data passes through so many hands at an agency. And we really believe that if there was ever a case of malfeasance with the data, we would see BLS staff quit in protest. So that is really our canary in the coal mine. And thanks for listening. And now I'm going to pass it over to Gretchen.
I'm Gretchen Gerke, co-founder of the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative, EDGI, which is a founding member of the Public Environmental Data Partners, the group I'm representing today. Next slide, please. PEDP is a coalition of environmental data, justice, and policy organizations, researchers, and technologists who came together in November of 2024 to preserve public access to federal environmental and climate data and tools. We curated a list of critical at-risk data that people really rely on by reaching out to environmental justice advocates, government oversight groups, environmental litigators, and networks of state and local government leaders. And we've become a trusted ally to federal civil servants as well. And thus far, we've archived nearly 400 data sets that people from these stakeholder groups have specifically requested. The White House Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, CJEST, and EPA's EJ Screen were by far the most frequently requested items. So when the White House and EPA took down these tools within the first weeks of the Trump administration, we were ready and had our own copies publicly deployed within days. And each of them has had tens of thousands of visitors since then. What we learned from our outreach and also from the reception of these rebuilt tools and others is that tools, programs, and other structures that help people engage with data and make meaning from the data are absolutely essential to preserve if we want the data to continue being used. And interestingly, these tools and ways of making meaning from the data are what we've seen attacked the most. We have seen the removal of primary environmental data, but at least in the environmental sphere, what we've seen much more of is the removal of value-added secondary data products, tools, and reports. But the deletion of data and data products is just one threat to data. We're also seeing programs and offices that produce and steward data, like EPA's Office of Research and Development, being shuttered. We're also seeing regulations that generate critical data, like the Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program, being repealed. And we're seeing extensive information geared for the general public being removed from agency websites. And these threats are in many ways increasing, and we expect to see even more impacts in the coming year. Next slide, please. So we in PDP and all of my fellow panelists and all of their groups are responding in multiple ways to address these multiple threats. First, we're coordinating. We're learning from each other, building bridges across silos, and connecting efforts. In September, PDP held a convening with dozens of groups that launched 6 multi-organization projects into the new year. We're ramping up our advocacy about the crucial role of the federal government in data stewardship, while we're also building stopgap measures with preservation of data and tools, and critically using this time to blueprint and prototype more robust and resilient data ecosystems for the future. And to this end, we're working to improve the accessibility and usability of the data that we're safeguarding. We're building lightweight, readily reproducible tools to search, filter, and export from huge databases like EPA's risk management plan data, which is what you can see here on the right. And we're also building custom tools to take environmental justice analyses to the next level, including updating and expanding the capacities of CJUST and EJ Screen, shown here on the left, and launching new efforts as well. And we're using the insights we've gleaned and additional research that we're doing to develop policy proposals so we're not in this position where the data can go dark again. Thank you, and now I'll pass it to my esteemed colleague, Meeta Anand.
Gretchen, thank you so much. It is really an honor to be here amongst so many incredible colleagues. My name is Meeta Anand. I'm Senior Director of Census and Data Equity at the Leadership Conference Education Fund. The Leadership Conference Education Fund is the sister organization to the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, and that represents a coalition of over 240 member organizations who advocate for civil rights for our most underrepresented communities. Before I move on to my slides, I just wanted to pause for a second and say, we are all talking about data, but I wanted to remind us all what we mean when we say that we're talking about data, especially as we approach the semi-quincentennial of our nation's founding. Data are people, and that is why one of the things we did in 2025 was launch our We Are the Data website, because as long as we do not see our communities fully represented in data sets, we are then not able to understand their needs, advocate for appropriate policies, and truly ensure that the American dream exists for everyone. So that is why we say we are the data, and that is why everyone here does the work, so that we truly are able to understand our communities. So next slide, please. So I told you who we are. What did we do? Well, when we started way before January 31st, like many of my colleagues here. We started in November, and we started soliciting information from the civil rights community as to which data sets they were most concerned about, so that we were able to plug into other groups who were able to archive data sets and point people to data sets that they needed. Separately, we are concerned about the continued collection of race and ethnicity data and the implementation of the new revised standards of race and ethnicity data collection at the federal level, so-called SPD 15. We are doing that work by both monitoring what the federal government is putting forth in Federal Register notices, what their plans are for implementation, but also encouraging our state and local partners to go ahead and use the revised standards now, because that gives us a more accurate picture of our communities versus what we view as a threatened rollback of such collection. What are we doing? We are engaging our Data Disaggregation Action Network, which I'll talk more about on the next slide. And we are looking to inform the public on the needs and uses of race and ethnicity data collection. And we are continuing to uphold the need for data integrity and quality in the ACS and the decennial census. those data sets are so critical to all the other data sets you're hearing about today. And if we see these drop off in response rates, such as that we anticipate due to fears of weaponization of data, that does put our entire system at risk. And like I said, we want to make sure that all people are represented equally well in our data sets so that they can achieve what they deserve to achieve in our society. Next slide, please. So what is the Data Disaggregation Action Network? We currently are engaging with 5 national partners and 3 state and local partners and have a listserv of 352, so please join, bring it up. But this serves to engage our communities in understanding the importance of data and being represented in the data. And a friend of mine said to me early on in this process, it's hard to get people to think about data when we see people being disappeared on the streets. And I feel that deeply. But to also be disappeared in the data in today's society is to mean that your story is not told and that you are forgotten in the allocation of resources or the crafting of policies. So to have community organizations be able to talk about the importance of data in this moment is critical to the ongoing maintenance of these processes and ongoing maintenance of policies that actually help everybody. So we respond to threats by encouraging research, identifying necessary research through public campaigns and education, through thinking through what counteractions or what legislation we need in this moment is, working with our litigation partners, and most importantly, engaging in mitigation. And by that, I mean helping all of our partners who are standing up alternative data sets, alternative pathways to getting to the data, but ensuring that as they are doing so, that they are making sure that all communities are appropriately represented in these data sets. And with that, I'm going to pass it to one of my all-time favorite data allies, Caroline Medina.
Thanks, Mita. I'm Caroline Medina with the Movement Advancement Project. My work focuses on advocacy, policy, and research to strengthen the ethical and responsible governance of sexual orientation and gender identity, or SOGI data. And at its core, this work is about making sure data supports evidence-based policymaking, civil rights enforcement, and intersectional research that benefits not only LGBTQ communities, but the public more broadly. Next slide, please. On the first day of his second term, President Trump signed Executive Order 14168, and this order attempts to redefine sex for all federal policy purposes as binary and immutable, attempting to deny the existence and legal recognition of transgender, non-binary, and intersex people, and it directs federal agencies to collect sex data only as male or female and prohibits the collection of gender identity data altogether. The effects on gender identity data were immediate and wide-sweeping, and although the executive order does not explicitly mention sexual orientation, some agencies have taken it as an opportunity to also remove those measures as well. We've seen the removal or suppression of measures from hundreds of federal data collections, including major surveys like the American Housing Survey and the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System. These removals hinder the ability to understand and meet the needs of LGBTQ people across key areas of everyday life. Research has also halted. One prime example is that the Census Bureau stopped research on adding gender identity measures to the American Community Survey, which Mita just mentioned, is the nation's premier survey that shapes policy decisions, civil rights enforcement, and the allocation of trillions of dollars in public resources. In response, litigation is underway. This includes the Doctors for America lawsuit, which led to the restoration of more than 195 federal public health websites, and ongoing litigation seeking the release of the American Community Survey SOGI research consistent with federal privacy protections under Title 13. Next slide, please. MAP has focused heavily on monitoring the implementation of this executive order. In just the first 6 months, at least 370 federal instruments were modified to remove SOGI questions. And importantly, this is not only about demographic questions. Many removed items that allowed people to report discrimination, bullying, harassment, and violence based on gendered identity, and in some cases, sexual orientation. In partnership with organizations like Williams Institute, MAP tracks these changes in depth and relies on tools like Data Index and Data Rescue Project to support documentation of removals and locate unaltered data sets. MAP will soon be releasing a new product that explains the policy impacts of removing these data. But monitoring isn't enough. Accountability really does matter. In addition to the litigation I mentioned, public comments and advocacy continue to be critical. One example is that MAP and partners successfully pushed the Bureau of Justice Statistics to reverse its decision to remove questions on anti-transgender hate crimes from the National Crime Victimization Survey, preserving data needed to enforce federal hate crimes laws. As federal agencies retreat from collecting and stewarding SOGI data, states still have a critical role to play. MAP is supporting state partners looking to conduct statewide surveys and needs assessments to fill data gaps. We're also working with partners to ensure strong data governance, especially better protecting sensitive administrative data to safeguard against misuse for surveillance, discrimination, or adverse eligibility decisions. Finally, MAP has conducted community-engaged research to better understand attitudes towards government data collection, motivations for participation, privacy concerns, and trusts, especially in the current environment. These insights are essential for designing data systems that are not only inclusive, but trusted and safe. While LGBTQ communities are among the first to feel the harms of eliminating data under the second administration, the consequences extend far beyond any single population. Defending inclusive, accurate federal data is ultimately about preserving the tools needed for accountability, transparency, and effective governance for everyone. And with that, I'll pass it over to Mary Jo.
Thanks, Caroline. Hi, I'm Mary Jo Mitchell, and I'm Director of Government Affairs for the Population Association of America. I represent population scientists, demographers, economists, sociologists, all of whom rely on federal data to conduct their important life-saving scientific research and training. So next slide. As you can imagine, given I've told you about the PAA, the loss of federal data on the websites really struck a raw nerve because, as I said, these data are so invaluable to our community in order to understand causes and consequences of population change. Of course, we knew we weren't alone. We knew we had colleagues in the data user and scientific stakeholder community who shared our concerns. So by working independently as well as with our coalition partners, we took immediate action when we began to see these data disappear by leading a sign-on letter that was directed at congressional leadership. The letter, which came out on February 11th, which we circulated thanks to the help of the Council of Professional Associations on Federal Statistics and the American Statistical Association, documented the events that began at the end of January when we first started seeing data disappear and whole websites disappear for that matter. It called on Congress to demand that the administration restore all missing data. That letter was signed by 230 national, state, and local organizations and almost 3,000 individuals nationwide. And it proved to be a catalyst for a number of follow-up activities that occurred, including an action alert that PAA issued, as well as other organizations. But speaking for my own organization, our action alert generated 455 unique messages to members of Congress urging the restoration of missing federal data and websites. We also received numerous inquiries from the media, and that led to interviews with outlets including Politico, New York Times, Associated Press, and National Public Radio. Also, we heard from a number of staff on both sides of the aisle in the House of Representatives and the Senate. And in fact, our letter inspired members of Congress to take their own actions. And I put links in the chat, links to letters that were sent, for example, by Representatives Don Beyer and Kathy Castor, who co-led a Dear Colleague letter that attracted the signatures of 80 members of the U.S. House of Representatives, directing OMB to restore missing data sets and tools and asking the administration very targeted questions about their plans for protecting missing data in the future. We also, Senator Gary Peters sent a letter that was sent to all cabinet secretaries regarding the legal requirements for retaining, preserving, and making all federal records and data available. As a result of PAA's visibility on the disappearing data issue, we were asked to speak at not one but two briefings that the Government Accountability Office held in 2025. We were asked to address the scope of the disappearing data problem and how the population research community was mobilizing to salvage and protect federal data, as well as continue to make it available to the public. These high-bed briefings were attended by approximately 500 GAO staff. Within our own organization, we developed a portal so we could monitor the impact of the disappearing data issue on our members. It was a confidential portal that allowed us to capture their stories, and we were able to not only capture stories about how they were being impacted by missing data and surveys, but also terminated federal grants and contracts. And in turn, we could share those stories through a variety of venues that such as our 2025 Advocacy Day, in which over 100 PA members from 30 states met with their congressional offices to talk about the call for the restoration of federal data. Next slide. Just quickly, PA continues to work independently as well as a member of numerous coalitions that are advocating for the collection, release, and protection of federal data and the federal statistical system overall. There are a couple of examples on this slide, but most recently, we've been working to raise awareness about the termination of the current population survey food security supplement and navigate a solution as part of the broader food security community by participating in the Food Security Data Collaborative. We also are working to protect the federal workforce and federal statistical agencies, and really happy to join the efforts that my friend Steve Pearson described at ASA to really rethink the future of the federal statistical system. So with that, I'll turn it over to Hannah at Democracy 2025.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with so many other data integrity and data privacy warriors. My name is Hannah Hickman. I'm one of the litigators at Democracy Forward and one of the working group co-leads for our Democracy 2025 team. Democracy Forward is a national legal organization that works to advance democracy and social progress through litigation, policy and public education, and regulatory engagement. And Democracy 2025, which I hope some of you are familiar with already, is a hub that Democracy Forward created. It's a coalition now, I think, of over 675 organizations. It is intended to be a unified legal front in the fight against the rollbacks of democratic protections, and the fight for people in the current administration. We really try to have Democracy 2025 be a force multiplier to create resources and coalition building, so that organizations can do the most powerful work possible in these critical times. So we could jump to the next slide. I'm just going to take a few moments today to talk with you about a slightly adjacent topic to what we've been hearing about so far, which is how data can be weaponized, and people's privacy can be violated by the actions of the Trump-Vance administration. I'm going to give an example of one of our cases here to sort of highlight some of the key takeaways, I think, from the last year of what has been pretty intense data privacy litigation. There are, I imagine, now dozens of privacy cases, and they began just about a year ago when we all remember Elon Musk and his chainsaw and the Doge teams going into agencies. And one of the things that those Doge teams were doing is they were grabbing up data. They were grabbing laptops of data. They were detailing 19-year-olds to lots of different agencies. Data was moving around in a way that was extremely troubling and not at all compliant with federal law. And that has sort of kicked off what has been a year's worth of, as I said, very robust litigation. The case I'm highlighting here is our case involving the privacy of taxpayer data. And this is one of the earliest cases that we filed at Democracy Forward. This case had to then be amended a little bit further into the spring of last year because the facts changed on the ground, and I'll speak a little bit about that. And then the facts changed again over the summer, and the IRS started mass data sharing with the Department of Homeland Security. We talked a little bit earlier about, data not being as exciting perhaps as what we're seeing in the news. But in fact, oftentimes data is what allows the government to snatch people off the streets and disappear them. And this was a terrific example of that kind of weaponization of data. The Department of Homeland Security was asking the IRS to share the data of millions of immigrant taxpayers, specifically their mailing addresses. And as you all know, we have to file tax returns every year. This is something that's required of us by the government. And so there are very strong privacy protections around that data that they were running roughshod over. So we got a preliminary injunction in November in this case, which has at least for now stopped the data sharing with the Department of Homeland Security. I would encourage you to check out the page that we have dropped into the chat and have in the slides here if you want to learn more about this case, and in particular, if you want to see the details of the ruling. I want to highlight three key takeaways from my experience litigating this case, and I think what we've seen across a number of our privacy cases at Democracy Forward. The first is what I would describe as the sort of maturation or the institutionalization of DOJ across the federal government. Over the course of the last year, we have seen them shift tactics, shift approaches. It's no longer 19-year-olds detailed to 7 agencies at a time. It's now, more established personnel hired into specific agencies, and the data sharing is happening in a more standardized way, often papered with agreements, with Privacy Act disclosures, and so on. The underlying policy goals are very much still the same. They are pursuing the same data aggregation, cross-agency sharing, and efforts to weaponize that data, in particular to support immigration enforcement, but the tactics have changed. And so this takes me to my next takeaway, which is that our tactics have to change too, and monitoring Privacy Act statements and the kinds of things that come out in the Federal Register can be a very helpful way of keeping an eye on what's going on. And then the final sort of takeaway from this litigation I would share is the importance of coalition. And if we could jump to the next slide. Lots of different organizations are litigating these cases and often tackling the same issue from a few different angles. And we had the benefit in our case of another organization making a FOIA request for a document that we really needed for our preliminary injunction. And this kind of cross-coalition work is just really critical to litigating these cases successfully. So I would encourage you to check out the Democracy 2025 website and sign up if you're not already a member. It is a great way to plug into some of these coalitions, especially if you're doing this kind of work. And with that, I will hand it off to Linda.
Hi, thank you very much. It's an honor to be a part of this group today. I'm Linda Kellum, one of the co-founders of the Data Rescue Project, an initiative focused on rescuing and preserving at-risk federal public data. Next slide, please. As you all know, and as we talked about in early 2025, we witnessed unprecedented attacks on federal public data, beginning with the CDC datasets and the USAID website. It became clear that data about people, communities, and social conditions were at risk. Concerns about data access led us to create the Data Rescue Project, drawing on but extending beyond data rescue models started in 2017. The Data Rescue Project began as a partnership among 3 library professional communities, iAssist, RDAP, and the Data Curation Network. What started as a simple shared document created by librarians to help patrons find information grew into a collective grassroots response. That growth reflected the urgency of the moment and a recognition that this work could not be done in isolation. Next slide, please. From the beginning, we understood that meaningful data rescue requires coordination, communication, and sustainable practice. We work closely with partner organizations in the US and internationally. We've learned from other efforts such as Saving Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Online and have coordinated with groups such as PEDP to address the loss of data access across various domains. Over the past year, we've helped rescue or coordinated the rescue of more than 1,700 data sets across multiple federal agencies. This is expert-driven work that prioritizes documentation, data curation, and usability. Access to the data is the central part of this effort. Many of our rescued data sets are preserved and shared through Data Lumos, a repository developed by ICPSR at the University of Michigan. They developed this repository in 2017 as a location for at-risk federal data. And through that infrastructure, hundreds of data sets have been made publicly accessible with over 10,000 downloads to date. This represents a shift from ad hoc rescue to durable access. We've also partnered with other groups to build the Data Rescue Portal, which tracks rescued data sets from across different organizations and disciplines and points users to their current preservation locations. So this addresses a key lesson from 2017, that without shared infrastructure, rescue data becomes harder to find. If data aren't findable, they aren't usable, and our primary goal has been ensuring that the public can access and use this data. So looking ahead, we face challenges we cannot solve alone, including questions of restricted access data, data integrity, trust in public data systems, and sustainable infrastructure for future rescues, both in the US and globally. Even though we have a lot of work to do, a strong community is the thread that connects all of these. And if this work resonates with you, I encourage you to connect with our partner organizations or with the DRP. Our slogan for the past year has been that public data are the people's data, Access to public data is fundamental for an informed electorate within a democracy, but preserving that information is a responsibility we all share. Thank you. And I'm going to hand it over to Mark at the Population Reference Bureau.
Thank you, Linda. I'm Mark Mather with PRB, and I'm going to introduce PRB's Federal Data Forum, which is focused on connecting people across the public data community. Next slide, please. So the Federal Data Forum is designed to be a safe space for public data stakeholders. That includes researchers, advocates, analysts, to share what they've been seeing, what to do when data are no longer available, and how they can help. So the site has grown pretty rapidly since we launched this last May. We now have over 700 members, which tells us that there's a real appetite for places that places where people can go for problem solving on these important issues around data. The Federal Data Forum includes a discussion space, monthly blog posts, and we've recently added a new AI-powered search to make it easier for people to find relevant conversations and tools and guidance as the content on the site has increased over time. This site is also going to be the new home for the ACS online community. Some of you are probably members of the previous ACS site. We had maintained that site in partnership with the US Census Bureau, and it was decommissioned in September of last year. We're doing this partly to make sure that all the great content in the old ACS site is preserved, but also because the Federal Data Forum seemed like the logical place for ACS data users to continue the conversations that they were having. And we're very close to launching that site. We expect it to be live sometime in February. So if you're involved in tracking public data issues, building monitoring tools, or helping others navigate gaps in federal data, the forum is really meant to support and amplify that work. We're not trying to duplicate or compete with other organizations, these other panelists that you've heard today. If this sounds useful, we hope that you'll sign up. You can just go to federaldataforum.prb.org, and it's free to join. I do want to thank several organizations that have helped us piece together funding for this effort, including the Massive Data Institute at Georgetown, the Annie Casey Foundation, the David and Lucille Packard Foundation, and PRB, which has kicked in some institutional support. Next slide, please. And I'll just close by providing a screenshot of some of the recent discussion posts. We're tagging these posts as well, so if users are interested in a particular data set or topic, we have these tags that are added that will help you customize the content that you can see on the site, including something that we've added called Take Action, which has been very useful to find new opportunities to respond to Federal Register notices and take other kinds of actions to protect the data. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Amy.
Thanks, Mark. I'm Amy O'Hara, and I'm the president of the Association of Public Data Users. We've been around for 50 years supporting and representing data users, but frankly have never faced disruptions in the data ecosystem like this before. We got out there early and often last year, explaining why the data matter and tracking the norms that were falling by the wayside. Aptu has been working to stay on top of things involving data production and use. Could I get the next slide, please? Thanks. We've been tracking legislative and regulatory changes, the loss of and the restoration of data, and considering viable replacements. We've been talking with our peer organizations, many of whom are on this call, and the media about the world we are in and the one that we might end up with. We remain concerned about the potential for the misuse of existing data and systems. We've engaged with the data community during our unconference and our data integrity summits. There is concern out there, but there's also energy, but we learned that there were knowledge gaps. We recognized that we needed communications outside the Beltway, not just for folks that are embedded in DC and these conversations with federal agencies. So Aptu developed an open access, frequently updated slide deck that you can look at that helps you explain what's going on and why it matters. We've held multiple state of data briefings that can be focused on what organizations need, what their issues are, what their concerns are. We continue to hold rapid response data briefings in collaboration with our partners, some of whom are on this panel. In these conversations, we've heard different privacy worries, and that has prompted a new initiative to increase understanding of data privacy. That can include what's legal, what is enforceable, and what transparency is needed. Next slide. So I invite you to get involved with us. Become a member of APDU, read our newsletter, hop into one of those rapid response briefings. They are short and sweet. They will take 30 minutes of your day, but you will walk away with a lot more information and action items on how you can get involved, make your voice heard, and make sure that people continue to care about and support public data. You can check out that slide deck that I mentioned that has talking points on these data issues. And please let us know if you want us to talk to your group. We can provide background information, do training on how to protect data assets, or we could host a wide open Ask Me Anything forum that can be tailored to the data types or worries that your organization has. Next, we'll hear from Chris at Data Index.
Thank you, Sammy, and thank you to everyone who's presented thus far. My name is Chris Dick. I'm a co-founder, contributor to dataindex-us, where our goal is to monitor as much of the federal data infrastructure as possible. Next slide, please. We started out with dataindex.us really early, probably December of 2024. Myself, Denise Ross, and another person who I think is on the webinar, Alvarez. And where we started was really just a URL tracker. And I know we kicked off the meeting talking about January 31st when all of those sites went down, all of the data assets went down. That was a really big test for us because we were able to start seeing a bunch of those URLs, start returning more invalid codes. And very useful for us to be able to say, hey, we know all of things are down. But as they started coming back up, people had questions of, well, are the data the same? And we hadn't built anything to that problem yet. And we started building towards that. We also started to add other questions. And those other questions, things like, what is the risk going to happen again? Or if things are going down, if things are changing, what can we do about it? So over the past year, we've been working to build tools to do some of those things. Some of the things that we over the last year, we have a take action area of our website, which is really focused on opportunities for folks to actually respond to Federal Register and actually give public comment federal forms and surveys that either are being changed or being updated. We've helped to showcase over 450 comment opportunities on those. We also look at something which is basically requests to these different federal survey data collections, and monitored all of those for presidential action-driven changes identified. Some of the things like what Caroline was highlighting with the SOGI changes based on executive order. We've also been working to get to and PRB and others rapid response data briefings when large changes are being made, and we've seen hundreds of additional comments submitted right after those rapid response briefings having big impacts on those collections. But the thing I want the rest another like minute about is how we've really started to think about this idea of risk assessment for data sets going down. And really something that we're going to be releasing in the coming days called our data checkup, which is really focused on 6 dimensions for assessing risk for federal data sets. So if we go to the next slide. If you go to our website, this is on the left-hand side, you go to data check. On the left-hand side here, this is what you will see. We have a whole different data sets that we're tracking, and we have 6 different areas that we're trying to measure risk. So if you click on one of these data sets and click see more, you'll see what we have right-hand side here. This is the data checkup for the National Survey of Children's Health. And we're focusing on these 6 different areas: historical data availability, future data availability, data quality, statutory context, resources, and policy. I don't want to get into this too much because we don't have that much time today. But basically, we're trying to rate these on a no known risk because we can't fully know actually a risk, moderate risk or high kind of levels here. For historical data availability in this case, we know specifically that one of the questions was actually taken off of historical data, particular data set. For future data availability, we know that a particular was missed, likely due to the shutdown. For data quality, we don't have any known issues. For statutory context, we're looking at what regulations or what statutes actually say the data need to be collected. Statutory authorization for this data collection is very vague. For resourcing, we're looking at both staffing as well as budgetation, and we know in this case that HHS lost more than 10,000 employees even before the shutdown happened. And then at the policy level, we know that in information was submitted in April of last year, saying basically that they remove a particular question. So this is something that we're going to be adding data assets to. I know there was a question about agriculture data. That's an area that we're very interested in, as well as a ton of different areas. So definitely keep an eye on the page, and I will pass it to Beth.
I want to take a moment to thank all of our panelists and to thank all of you for participating today and for your continued interest in and support of public data. As I mentioned at the top, we recorded today, and we will be following up with all of the registrants with the recording, with resources from all of our panelists and links where you can get additional information. So thank you so much. I appreciate it, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.